A few weeks ago, I suggested to an audience that I was going to shift gears. And in the month or so that has passed since then, I have not, at least not outwardly. But what I have to talk about is different from what it is that we have been sharing over the past several months. It's certainly, at least outwardly. I have looked at my life as a combination both of a spiritual path that I take myself and as what I may do to contribute to my family, my friends, the neighborhood around me, the community, and my nation, and my commitment with respect to the Federal Reserve, ending it, and to sharing what I thought about the various historical anomalies of our existence, and the Q postings and the rest of that has been in light of those dual paths and how I see those dual paths not really as separate but all as part of one thing, and it's what's motivated me to be as involved as I have over these past several months. Some of that certainly has shifted over the past few weeks, and obviously we are going to go to a new phase here shortly as this summer season progresses and as the off-year presidential or interim election, the non-presidential election, occurs this year. So what I want to share, I probably will have to read, at least in part, because both because it's difficult and also because I can articulate it better in doing so. So please forgive me if I read this, and then I will share with you some of my thoughts and perceptions after I get done reading this. It's not very long, it's about 3 pages or so. But in addition to that, this is just the first installment of what may be many. So let me share with you what happened to me in 1976 to the young guy that was so full of himself then, and how the beginning, the first page of how my life began to change on that at that time. So here's the story. Chapter 1, The Wonder of Childbirth. I bounded up 5 flights to the maternity floor, only to find Kate being wheeled into the emergency surgical room, her hand held by our anxious Lamaze instructor, Bonnie, who half yelled at me as they rounded the corner, "The baby is in distress and the doctor has ordered an emergency C-section." But even as we wheeled Kate into the surgical room, the contractions hastened, almost as if in response to the tension newly surrounding us. In a few moments, he was born even before the staff could perform surgery. Saved, we thought, by a rapid birth. In moments as I held Kate's hand, Chad was born. Almost as fast as Chad materialized, he disappeared from the room in the arms of an in-charge surgical nurse. I followed, but they disappeared with him into the prenatal center. They went directly to the intensive care room, and one of the now growing entourage of nurses already swarming around our baby grabbed the hallway picture window curtains and thrust them closed. For a time I stood there staring at the curtains. Only years later did I come to appreciate that those closed curtains signified an end to a chapter in my life. From that day forward, the chasm between my old life and my new life would grow. I did not fully grasp at the time that much of the way I saw the world and myself began a metamorphosis at that very moment. At birth, there is a shorthand baby evaluation called the APGAR score to assess an infant by allotting up to 2 points for each vital sign: heart rate, breathing effort, muscle tone, response to stimulation, and color. Of all the points possible, Chad's only vital sign and his single APGAR point was a little color. He was severely traumatized by his own birth. After the birth, Kate and I were ushered to a hospital room adjacent to the nursery and furthest away from the intensive care room. We were restive but optimistic to the new parents we had become, and remained confident that this little episode of anxiety would soon pass. When I roamed the halls that evening, I saw the pediatrician we had interviewed weeks before as part of our preparation for Chad's birth. A look of panic came across his face when he recognized me. He immediately spun on his heel and briskly walked away. It took me days to realize that his panic at even seeing me was well-founded. As a healthy baby doc, I represented his worst nightmare. In the coming months and years, in oh so many ways, many people responded to us in much that same way. Around midnight that night, another pediatrician came to our room. We were given initial information that while Chad was in the birth canal, the umbilical cord had been looped over the top of his head. Each succeeding contraction had flattened the cord between his skull and his mom's pelvis, thereby depriving him of oxygen. His first bowel movement, called meconium, had fouled his amniotic fluid and may have compromised his lungs, also indicating birth trauma. I would come to appreciate later as a pattern, the doctor only vaguely alluded to Chad's condition as challenging before he launched into the four primal feelings we were likely to have: guilt, fear, anger, and remorse. At that time, we had no idea what the hell he was talking about, or why he was sharing this information with us at this happy moment. We were confident that everything would work out. He knew better, but like other young doctors, medical school had not taught him how to tell us that. Our room next to the nursery was a noisy place. All night long we heard beep, 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 beep every half hour or so, starting at first with a measured beat, building to a crescendo of very rapid beeps before it subsided. We had no idea what caused it. The next morning I wanted to see Chad, so I asked to go to the intensive care room in the nursery. It was 1976, after all, and I was perhaps the first man to have ever made that request. The nurse supervising me treated me as though I had just come from the hog pens. It occurred to me that no amount of scrubbing would remove my maleness. Only after reminding, scolding, and inspecting me several times was I allowed to enter the sacred inner confines of the intensive care nursery. When I finally stood by his crib, Chad lay there connected to wires, hoses, and tubes. I stood by him for some time, gazing at his flaccid body. He did not respond to me being there or to the many noises in the room. His breathing was measured by a mechanical pump feeding air to the mask on his face. A foggy somberness came over me. Suddenly he began to move. With his first quiver, lights flashed and a beeper went off, the sound we had heard all night long. As his heart began to rapidly increase, the monitor displayed an angry, jagged line accompanying the now deafening crescendo of beeps. As his eyes opened, but the pupils quickly rolled up and behind the top of his lids. His limbs stiffened and his back arched as every muscle in his body became powerfully rigid. His heart rate crested well above 200 beats a minute. An agitated nurse rushed into the room to make adjustments. The doctor's oblique references to challenges the night before suddenly had new meaning. Even as Chad's heart raced, mine sank into a chasm of almost instant despair. After about 5 minutes, Chad relaxed and returned to his unresponsive state. What I witnessed, I learned sooner than I cared to know, was that Chad was having grand mal seizures, one after another. And the adjustments being made for him were to find a medicating formula to bring them under control. Until and unless they could stabilize him, the mechanical pump, breathing tubes, and mask would be his only assurance of continued oxygen through those all-powerful seizures. As I walked to my car that morning, wave after wave of growing comprehension washed over me. We were in very serious trouble. I drove back to the office with a prayer, something I seldom did. Dear God, please let Chad be functional enough to at least work with me in the wood shop. It was not to be. So I have shared with you what I perceive as a draft of my first chapter. And in the coming weeks and months, I will share more and more and share with you how both my life outwardly and inwardly changed and metamorphosized as I became more and more aware that my path was not going to be one of the more beaten path, that I would be taking the path less traveled, as I think it's what Scott Peck said. And every time I thought I could get back onto the mainstream path and take it over as I thought I could, I was drawn again away from it. And I was drawn again away from it for obvious reasons. I shared with you earlier today something that has been going on in my life for many, many years, and that is what I call serendipity. Some of you have shared with me, and I very much concur, that there is more than simply serendipitous occurrence. There is a greater force, and that greater force guides us to a spiritual life and to new learning. So it took me many years, and I will share with you the process by which I got there, to appreciate that the terrible trauma my child had that day was a gift. It was a gift from him, and it was a gift from the greater spiritual power that is part of all of us. And it was a wake-up call not to be oblivious to the path that I was about to take. So I will close with that now, but I will be sharing with you other chapters as we go forward. And while I know for many of you this is a unnecessary and unwanted discussion, for others I hope that it resonates. It resonates both with your own paths and with how the world unfolds and with the spiritual path we all take. So with that, I will close. Thank you for your attention. I certainly appreciate the lovely and engaged following that has come about, and I welcome you into the group that we have by which we can share this. Thank you again.